I think this kind of illustrates or showcases a bit the dog in Sam Altman. He's a very presentable, well-spoken, nice person. That's how he presents, right? But I think there's definitely like a lot of Elon or Travis Kalanick in how he operates. He is a ruthless operator, a little bit of an iconoclast, a little bit of a troll. And, he's not going to let other people get in the way of his vision.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Amir Shevat.
So it's just the two of us today, Amir. Nonetheless, we have got a fantastic show for you today. We're going to be talking about the return of demo culture. Is Google being bold enough in integrating AI into its products? We're also going to be talking about the secular trend in layoffs and companies focusing once again on productivity. And finally, we're going to talk about the return of founder-led marketing. All that and more right after the break. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
This episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by Vanta. I get it. You hear security and compliance and you think time-consuming and stressful, but it's critical for scaling your business. Achieving compliance with ISO 27001, SOC 2, Essential 8, or other in-demand frameworks can unlock major growth for your company, help you sell to the enterprise, and establish customer trust. And with Vanta, you can get compliant in weeks instead of months and save up to 85% of associated costs. And just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast. So, Amir, the first thing we wanted to talk about today was demo culture. When OpenAI debuted the ChatGPT 4.0 last week, it was a live demo. Right, so this wasn't what you're used to, and we'll talk about Google in a moment, but these sort of highly produced, pre-recorded events where to the extent that there's a demo, it was already done in advance, and, they can have multiple takes. Google was actually caught a few months ago tampering with the demo to make their AI look more capable than it was. With OpenAI, I'm sure they rehearsed it a lot. It was highly produced in that sense, but it really was three people in a room talking to the AI, and a couple of little things went wrong, although it was pretty smooth. So what are your thoughts on that?
I actually really like it. When I was at Amazon, we used something called PR FAQ, which is like you write the PR for a feature, and then you write the frequently asked questions. That's what the PR FAQ stands for. And I love that because it creates very much a focus on the customer and the customer experience. And I think this demo actually takes it to the next level. I don't only tell you about a feature, I actually show you the feature. So I would love to get more companies, more startups actually showing me how the future looks like. And the minute I saw these videos, I went into my ChatGPT application. And of course, I didn't have access to those crazy features, but the aspiration of what the future could look like was really awesome. And I hope that a lot of other entrepreneurs will follow suit. And I love the fact that things went wrong. That's the magic that we need to have in our industry, right? We need to, it's okay to fuck up in public. It's okay for the AI to not be perfect because that's what you want to demo. You want to demo work in progress, not perfection like some of the corporates do.
It shows a lot of confidence as well because, things can go wrong in demos. But if you know your product is solid, then you're more likely to do it. The tech keynote, Amir, it sort of goes back to Steve Jobs, right? He's the person who really mastered the art of the tech keynote. I wonder if people kind of drew the wrong lessons from it a bit, because if I recall correctly, Steve Jobs' keynotes were very highly rehearsed, but they were also live. Right? When they were showing things back in his heyday, they were showing the iPhone. It was in his hand. He would play with it with his fingers, right? It wasn't a recording of someone using an iPhone. And I feel that companies like Google and maybe, more recent iterations of Apple took the wrong lessons from that, which is they took the highly produced, highly rehearsed aspect of it, but they removed all the spontaneity and makes it something a bit bland.
If you do it magical, then you lose trust. You lose the it glitched thing. I did Google developer groups. I remember one of the best demos was somebody doing something on Android, and the Android didn't actually work really well. So he just took the Android and like hit it on a table, and then it worked, and the entire audience just laughed. That's the magical moment because we're all creators, right? And if something doesn't work for you, that actually creates empathy. So I want to see more fuck ups. I want to see more truthfulness when you present your products.
What's definitely true is that you come away from the OpenAI demo event with a lot more precision and clarity about what they've actually built compared to Google, where it's like, okay, there were a lot of announcements and some of those things are live today, but it reduces the impact because there's sort of too much surface area, not enough spontaneity. Is this magic or is it a simulation of magic? I've used that word magic. So it's real magic isn't perfect, right?
Exactly.
Only in books is magic perfect. And if we're making magic, then it has more credibility with its flaws.
I totally agree.
So let's move on to Google. So we discussed the two events and what was announced last week, Amir, on this show. But apart from the production style, I think we've had a little bit more time to reflect on what Google have built and the extent to which they've maybe recovered from being caught completely flat-footed by AI over the last couple of years, despite having developed a lot of the technology themselves. What are your thoughts on what it is that they've put together there?
I think they are doing major strides and they have developed a lot of deep AI capabilities, both in the company. They also own one of the biggest data corpuses in the world. They have an opportunity to really shine in this market. My problem is that they are not implementing it in day-to-day life. I can give you a live example, right? So I'm lazy, like every engineer in the world, and I wanted to respond to an email. So there was a magical button there that says, hey, we'll write your email. And I press on that button, and then it gives you a prompt. Why is that prompt? Why do I need to prompt it? It knows how to answer an email. So I write answer, and it says, no, the prompt needs to be 3 words. So I said, answer the email. And then it generated an answer. Why do I need to go through all these steps if you can clearly integrate the magic into a product that I'm using every day? Maybe it's bold to say, but I want to see more of Google things, more of the mistakes, going back to our original conversation. I want to see more mistakes, more things that they experiment in Gmail, in Calendar, everywhere. And I want it to be integrated into the experience. I don't want to write answer the email. I want it to magically, when I hit reply, I want it to create a draft for me to just review and send. There's so many things that if you're a bold PM and not a cautious PM, you can do crazy stuff because Google has this real estate. We touch Google products every day, all the time. They could show us what good looks like, and I don't think they're doing that.
I'm inclined to agree with you. Over the past couple of years, what we've seen is a lot of products integrate AI in this superficial way, right? Where it's like, oh, let's put a magic sparkly AI button over here, and you press that button and you can sort of put a prompt in and then something. And some of those were even reasonably well executed technically, but they're not good product and they're not useful. They don't fit into your existing workflow. Like none of these tools do I press the magic AI button once I've actually tried it and the novelty's worn off, I never use it again. I think you're right that Google is at risk. Basically what they are doing at the moment is putting magic AI buttons throughout their productivity tools into Docs and into Gmail and so on. And they could be doing so much more and so much better. I actually just switched back from iPhone to Android for a variety of reasons, but one of which is I felt the desire to be closer to the Google ecosystem again as all this AI stuff is rolling out. I'll tell you what, something really confusing, and hopefully this is temporary, but knowing Google, it could be temporary for a long time, is that the Google Assistant and the Gemini Assistant are coexisting in this really awkward way. So I went full ecosystem. I got the Pixel 8, I got the Pixel Watch, I got the Pixel Buds, as you can see in my ears there. And each of them invited me to set up the Google Assistant. And on the phone, I could choose between the normal Google Assistant and Gemini. On the other two, I assumed it would just hook into what's on my phone, but no. If I say, hey Google, oh, probably listen to me now. Yeah, it did. And I'm wearing my headphones, I'll get the old Google Assistant. If I'm on my phone, I'll get Gemini. And also, now that I've got Gemini, if I ask it to play a song on Spotify, it doesn't know how. I would have to go back to the old Google Assistant for that. So it's like, it's really janky and a little bit disappointing that it's still there. And, one of the things it reminds me of, we've brought this up before, and this is the biggest example of Google screwing up that I don't want them to repeat, is Google+.
Yeah.
You were around then, weren't you?
I was I joined when Google announced that they won over Facebook with Google Plus because their numbers of people joining the platform was slightly
Right.
larger.
Right. So, I was there for the whole shit show, and it was very much like, oh, okay, let's, instead of thinking about thoughtfully creating a social substrate and tying together all our products using this enormous amount of data we have, right? There are a lot of similarities. Google had more data about people, more implicit social graph than anyone else. And they're like, okay, how could we make Gmail a bit better if we made use of the social aspect? How could we make Google Maps a bit better? They were like, okay, first of all, let's create a janky Facebook clone. And then instead of integrating it thoughtfully, let's just kind of slap it on top of everything. And that was why it was a missed opportunity. They could have actually made Google profoundly social. It turns out it wasn't as much of a sort of existential risk as they were worried about at the time. But at the time, they thought Facebook was going to kill Google. And if they'd been right, then Facebook would have killed Google because their response was completely ineffective. And it could have been effective. And the risk here with Google is the same. On the B2B side, they seem to be doing the right thing. On B2C, they've gone from a standing start and are doing interesting stuff. But yeah, it's true. My initial reaction last week was like they announced a bunch of good stuff at I.O. But if I actually think, to your point, Amir, I think it's very valid. Is AI in Google products actually something I'm using now? Not really.
No. And you should. And I think the problem is that if you work in a big company, you understand why that is. Because one PM is not willing to talk to another PM, or the roadmaps collide, or something like that. They need to have someone very high in the top saying, hey, AI needs to be integrated deeply into each product. That's the top priority for everyone. Stop everything that you're doing and just do that. And I don't think that they are doing that right now. I think they're doing...
Well, I mean, but that's interesting. I'll go back to Google Plus again, because you know what? They did do that back then, right? They had a single executive, Vic Gundotra, who was responsible for social. There was even the company bonus was tied to various metrics in social. We were all told, drop everything and do social. And despite that, and despite the financial incentive, it still fell flat. So, I think there's a lot of organizational debt there.
Yeah.
But when you say from the top, I think it needs to be from the very top. And you also need to cut a lot of the conservatism, the sort of organizational conservatism. Again, to your point, like they need to be willing to screw up a bunch of stuff. And I think they're not.
I think that's a big risk. I think if you don't take risks and you keep it safe, somebody who's willing to take risk will eat your lunch eventually.
Right. But this is the classic innovator's dilemma. A lot of Google products now span across business use cases and consumer use cases. So if you make Gmail better, is one of your big corporate clients going to be unhappy about something or other? And does it just mean when you have got hundreds of millions of users for your product, there are so many edge cases and corner cases, unless you're willing to burn some of your users, you're going to need to move slowly. And I think that's just a part of the innovator's dilemma. Like, are they willing to crack a few eggs to make this omelet, or are they going to move ahead very cautiously in order to make sure that nothing breaks for anybody?
Every time a startup is fearful that Google will steal their idea, or a VC would say, why wouldn't Amazon do this? Amazon is different, is a bad example, but why wouldn't Facebook do this? I asked them, have you ever tried to launch something really quick in an enterprise? It is very, very hard. It is almost impossible. To your point, the more customers you have, the more edge cases you have, the more unwillingness to take rapid risks you are.
It's really fascinating. I mean, if you were to look into a crystal ball, Amir, and sort of speculate on how these AI wars would play out. First of all, a bit of a Game of Thrones between the Magnificent Seven and then all of these startups, some of them very well funded. Which horse would you back? How do you see it playing out?
I would look at who will power Siri. I think that's the next big thing. I think the company that will power Siri will get 10x more traction, will be evaluated by billions more, and will probably be the winner. Interface is going to determine which AI will be better. It could be that we'll get a sub-optimized AI, but it's going to be in our everyday life, and that AI will win.
So why Siri and not Google Assistant?
Distribution. I think Google Assistant as well, but Google Assistant, the answer is probably they're going to use Google. But I think if you're talking about the startup, about OpenAI, about Microsoft, I think Siri is one of the prominent interfaces in a lot of decision makers and a lot of people, a lot of consumers. Right now, Apple is rumored to be partnering with either OpenAI or with Google. My crystal ball is waiting for that to happen. and then I'll have a lot more information about who will actually win this war.
The way I see it is this is still Google's to lose. Like, the more I've thought about it, the more structural advantages Google has in terms of being the preeminent company in AI. They have the compute, they have the deep tech, they have the distribution. They're the only company that has all three. So they are well positioned and it's theirs to lose. Now, the problem with Google is they are very capable of losing it. They will get more shots on goal than anyone else. They can afford to screw up a few times and still come out ahead. But they can't screw up an infinite number of times. And so then the question is, okay, can they actually get it together and use all of their natural advantages and natural tailwinds before someone catches up, like OpenAI, who actually, the more I think about it, is structurally quite weak because they have effectively no distribution, to your point. Their path to victory does lie through Siri. And if they don't stitch that up, they're actually, I think there'll be a footnote in 10 years' time. There'll be a very significant footnote in the same way that Netscape or Alta Vista, are significant footnotes in the history of the internet. But I don't think they're going to be a particularly big player unless they can lock up that distribution.
Yeah, especially if you look at if intelligence becomes a commodity. I envision a world in 5 years where you just choose your intelligence from one of the big providers. Just like you choose a S3, like storage, like compute, you would choose an intelligence and you would give it context and you would give it structure and you would give it workflows, and then you would use it like any other way. It will be vanilla. If that happens, then OpenAI is definitely, because they don't have the distribution, they're going to be reliant on someone else's distribution.
I think there's a consumer surplus on intelligence for most tasks. Actually, maybe this is an interesting thing to think about, right? There's always going to be a need for the most intelligent model for some use cases, sometimes, right? And, you have all these benchmarks and it's like, okay, ChatGPT is slightly ahead of Claude or whatever it is today. It's always moving around, right? But the truth is, all the models now are way better and way faster than even ChatGPT 3 was, a year and a bit ago. And increasingly, when I want to use an AI chat interface, I'm defaulting to whichever one is most conveniently to hand. I use both Gemini and ChatGPT, and quite often I'm like, oh, which tab's open, right? Because they're both very good.
Yeah.
And that's really dangerous for the companies that don't have the distribution locked in, because that way lies commodification. And that's a very old story, right? Like, it's the same as CPUs and smartphones and things like that. Doesn't matter if your thing is better than the other person's one. If both of them are more than good enough, then the nexus of competition moves somewhere else.
Exactly.
And I think we're very quickly getting there with models.
Yes. And I think also at a certain point, smart is smart enough.
That's right.
You don't need a genius for most use cases. And I think as product people and as techies, we really want the smartest model, but most people will say, hey, that's smart enough for me. If it's connected to my computer, to my phone, to my web, then that's it. I don't even know that there's a different model that is smarter. I don't really care, because the minute AI becomes a part of my life, it started gathering context. It knows my credit card. It knows my preference. I think the cost of migration at a certain point will become very, very expensive. So if you own the distribution, if you own the easy, common, in front of my eyes interface, that's going to be the winner.
And I guess my point is, I feel like we're basically there already. I'm already choosing my models based on convenience for most use cases, right? And, each one has maybe some slight strengths, but it's becoming less clear, right? I'm like, okay, which one generates text fastest and is the tab open? Like, I'm no longer thinking which one's going to give me the best result for most cases, because I'm like, unless it's something where I'm hyper optimizing, they're all good enough. So I don't care. We've moved to commodification scarily quickly. We've both been in the industry for a long time. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, but I do believe it's true. I've never seen a new technological wave where things have moved as quickly, where what was true 6 months ago is no longer true at all today.
100% true. And also how fast it became useful. Because a lot of the waves in the past have been, hey, there's Web3, it's going to change our lives. And it actually didn't change a lot of people's lives. And I think with this trend, consumers' behavior actually changed. Like a lot of my friends who are not techies are editing their emails every day using ChatGPT. Like communication has changed in a fundamental way in a very, very fast time frame. So I think that's another change in this wave, which is it's radically accessible to a lot of non-geeky, techie people in different ways than other waves.
I'm slightly more cautious on drawing that conclusion. I mean, of course, it's much more useful than Web3 because Web3, well, let's not go there. But I think it's true a lot of people use it. My wife's a high school teacher and they have a hell of a lot of trouble with kids using AI to cheat on all their work. I think it's probably harder to make a strong case that significant economic value has been created by AI yet. Sure, people are using it to rewrite their emails, but is it making them more productive? And to your point, like the integration into tools like Gmail don't seem to be actually at the point of improving productivity yet. So I do wonder if it's still more promise. Like we can all see the ways in which it could and should make us more productive, but is it actually generating extra economic value or any other sort of value really in the real world?
Again, every time I have this discussion with my wife, I'm always over optimistic. I think it is, and I think it will become a lot more, but I want it to be transparent. I don't want us to go to the AI. I want it to be integrated into every part of our life. I don't want to cut my email, post it in ChatGPT, and then take it back into email. I want it to be a transparent experience where the email client itself is offering me a different version of my email to make it easy. I think that's when you'll see a lot more value coming into enterprises, when it will be, or to our lives, when it will be very, very seamlessly integrated. But we haven't reached consumer adoption at global scale yet.
It will happen. I completely agree with you. I think there is a very clear path forward to massively accelerating productivity. Companies like Atlassian, Quora, and 7,000 others use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. Automate compliance and start scaling your business today. Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast. There's a topic I did want to talk about today, which is not triggered really by any particular piece of news, but I think it is topical, which is what I'm calling a secular trend in company layoffs. It's been happening for long enough now that companies are conducting layoffs even when business is good. And, I think the economy, we're certainly not out of the woods around, inflation and risks of recession and so on. But I'd say overall, the global economy is doing better. And yet I'm still seeing announcements of layoffs coming from overall healthy companies quite frequently. Amir, what are you seeing? What are your thoughts around the fact that companies just seem to be slimming down and getting more focused on productivity and doing more with fewer people?
So I definitely see it happening. I'm seeing more pressure on the same people. I'm seeing it's called quiet firing, which is
quiet quitting?
No, quiet firing. You take people and you just give them more and more and more responsibility by making roles redundant and merging them into other roles. So basically, instead of firing people, you don't hire new people and you give new work to the same people that are in the company. I'm seeing all of that, and I'm seeing deep pressure on productivity, and while doing all of that, still firing people. So I think it's definitely being normalized, the fact that all companies will fire people probably all the time, which wasn't the case. When I was at Google, nobody got fired. It was extremely rare to get fired. And managers didn't even get how to fire training because that was so rare.
But we weren't even really allowed to fire. So, I was a manager at Google. There were people I wanted to fire and HR effectively prevented me. So it was not just that we didn't get the training, but we were actually, so risk averse that we would rather keep an underperformer around than deal with whatever legal risk there might be around firing them.
Exactly. So I think that's not going to be the path forward.
And why is that? Is it Elon? I know you have direct experience of that. Is it AI? Is it just the end of zero interest rates? Why do we think this is happening now?
The answer is I don't know. I feel that there's been a shift. I feel like in the last 5 years, we were scrambling as an industry to hire people. And it was a very much seller's market. So employees were kings and they could choose any salary that they wanted and be as productive as they wanted and set all the stage. And I think the tides have turned. And I think it could be that one day it will reverse. But right now it's very clear that business is now driving and companies have the upper hand in this equation. It's also for hiring has become a lot more stringent. So people are saying that they're having open roles, but actually not hiring, or taking their very, very long time in hiring roles. So I think it's still fighting for the top 1% or 2% is still going to be a seller's market, still going to be an employer market. But for all the rest, the power is going to be in the company's hands.
I think this goes well beyond tech. One of the things that sort of got me thinking about this is just yesterday here in Australia, the major telecom provider announced a layoff of 3,500 people, not in an environment of economic distress, just because they wanted to be more efficient and more competitive. And just triangulating, I've also recently read a book called Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. He was also the guy who wrote Deep Work, which is a big bestseller. He's talked a lot about pseudo-productivity. I know there's another author who called it just bullshit work. This sense that what has happened over the last few decades is that technology has improved a lot. Knowledge work should have created this great new wave of productivity. And I'll come back to productivity, but instead what it's done is generated all of this pseudo work that is not productive. And you can easily end up in a situation where people are busy all day and don't really get much done. And then you hire more and more of those people. And at a certain point, I think the worm has turned and realized, and I do think, as much as I have problems with how Elon Musk does things and whatnot, is, that Twitter, the firing of 75% of the workforce, and the fact that a lot of the predictions of doom didn't eventuate. I know a lot's gone wrong at Twitter, don't get me wrong, but I think there was a sense of like, oh, okay, there were a lot of people maybe who were not contributing productivity to this. And so the bullish side of me is saying, as unpleasant as this transition is, it could be a really exciting time, because ultimately productivity, it can seem like a dry economic term. The way we all become more prosperous is with increased productivity. That's the only way you can grow GDP, is by being more productive. And so if now we're like, okay, we're no longer going to tolerate people just sort of having flatlining productivity, despite the availability of all these technologies that should be making them more productive, then we might actually have genuine increases in productivity across society. And ultimately that will make us all wealthier.
Potentially. There's also a book by Yuval Noah Harari where he talks about potentially having a class that is useless. If you reach a certain productivity and you don't need a lot of employees, what do you create? Like, what's next for that class? It could be that he's totally wrong and Andreessen is right, and like new jobs will be created and everybody's rich. But it also could mean a new class system where you have people who are productive and working and are like 10Xers and all the rest. And then we go back to the feudal system where like there's people who have and people who have not.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is interesting, and it gets philosophical. And of course, there's, that book, Brave New World, as well, that in a sense talks about that. But, I think there's a few things. Like, first of all, this is not the first time that people have been worried about this happening. When steam engines came into existence, when computers came into existence, all of this stuff is like, oh, okay, increases in productivity means that we will have a lot of useless people and they're going to be on the scrap heap. And that's never happened. I do think this time is different, is always a dangerous argument to make, because it's wrong until, of course, one day it's right. And I think the question is, is the combination of AI and robotics going to mean that for the first time we have basically non-human actors that can eclipse a certain group of humans in every way, right? That, they're more productive, they're stronger, they're all of these things. That's never been the case before. Now, do we go to a feudal system? The feudal system was a scarcity world, right? If we end up in a world of superabundance, I think it will create a lot of problems, but there'll be different problems, and the question is more like, how do we keep everyone entertained, and how do we make sure that we distribute the fruits of our superabundance effectively and stuff like that?
We could do another 2 hours on this. I don't know if
we could.
I'm seeing more and more founders being front and center in their company. So like removing all the marketing crap, all the slogans and the colors and stuff like that, and just being out there on social themselves. There were a few founders. I really like how Gong, the API gateway company, always had their founders front and center talking about distributed systems and stuff like that. But for a lot of the Silicon Valley, it was, I will let marketing do the outreach. And I think there's a change now. You see it even in Facebook and in other places where you see the founders actually being out there and speaking about product, speaking about vision. And I think that's a refreshing thing. I think it's slightly connected to the beginning of our conversation around demos and raw demos. I want to see raw truth from founders that are actually talking about the change that they're trying to make.
Yeah, it's amazing to see Mark Zuckerberg's transition around all this, right? I think he's the most dramatic turnaround. He's obviously had some really good training,
Yes.
but it's definitely a change of approach. Like, he's changed his look, sure, but he's also changed how he behaves. You know, he appeared on at least one unscripted podcast where he was just allowed himself to be interviewed. Sam Altman was also on All In last week. So this idea of the founder, having an unfiltered voice. So it's not just up on stage again, a highly produced keynote. It's just, hey, I'm going to get out there, I'm going to say what I like, how I like to say it. And that is more compelling. And, I think there are a few founders whose brand has improved so fast, so quickly as Mark Zuckerberg in the last year. He's gone from being like this kind of evil geek to being something quite different from that.
I think that's a very, very positive influence on the market, because up until a few years ago, like, you would see founders say the official party line, vetted by every PR person and every legal person, rendering it so vanilla that it doesn't mean anything. And now you see founders being actually themselves very raw, very truthful, and sometimes very cringy and making mistakes. But I really like that. Again, coming to the beginning of our conversation, doing demo live and having it break, that's part of life. Making a mistake and saying the wrong thing, that's part of life. And I think that's a much better way to be out of our comfort zone and into the risk. That's the way you actually innovate as a society.
It's interesting because it does sort of raise the question of what happens when the founder is no longer in charge. I think, for example, Tim Cook hasn't been able to follow that playbook. It very much ties a company to its founder, which I think is completely appropriate when you're a startup, a scale up, and so on. But when you're $1 trillion company, I don't know.
So find another person. Like, I think Apple did it a little bit with like some of their advocates. Find a person who's willing to show the vision. If you don't show people the vision in a raw way, they just don't have a vision for your company, for what you're building. And I think that's what I'm trying to say. I'm saying, like, founders need to be front and center. And if they can't, or the company has grown, find someone else who's front and center.
Yeah. I'm being the devil's advocate here. I really, quite strongly, I agree with you. I think it's really positive. It's nice to see. And it makes you wonder about how you market effectively, because, what you don't want to do is polish everything down so that there's no sharp edges. It's just a sort of a big ball of nothing. And it's nearly like, going back to our previous point around layoffs and productivity in smaller companies, where it's like, I think marketing is a key function, and shout out to all our marketing friends out there. But also, in many big companies, there are bloated bureaucratic marketing organizations whose job is to manage risk and be bland, who in many cases are probably contributing negative value to the brand, to their ability to market. And so you could certainly imagine marketing departments becoming, leaner and sharper and more focused on how do we amplify the voice of the leader rather than putting out these messages that don't mean much to anybody and are designed more not to offend than to inspire.
And I think that's another, if we look at it in a holistic way, we talked about firing because times are hard. You become more truthful when times are hard. You become more down to earth when times are hard. So I think all of these are signals of like, hey, we need to get down to earth and be truthful and show what we have and inspire instead of protecting what we have because we have a lot and we have abundance. So let's just cover our behinds. So I think that's the positive spin on like being pressured by the market and having more competition.
Look, I like all of this. Like I've said it before, I call myself a reluctant capitalist. I think I was a socialist when I was younger, and, I see a lot of the downsides of capitalism, but I also see that as a method for overall, like, lifting up humanity, it's unrivaled. Right. And so when you see, okay, like, if we can liberate people from doing bullshit work and do more interesting work and be more productive and add more meaning and more value, then that's awesome. Right. And the market eventually corrects in that direction. So I really like to see that. There's two other sort of news topics that I don't know if I can be bothered commenting on, which is just the OpenAI gossip, right? Ilya and the alignment team out as one, and Scarlett Johansson as the other. Is anything we want to say about that? We can just have a quick hot takes.
I don't have a hot take. I don't care who's in the helm as long as they deliver the value that I want. I've seen so many Game of Thrones happening in these type of companies. Yeah. It's a good signal that even the biggest, best companies fuck up. I think that's good experience to founders because founders in early stage think that everything is broken in their startup and everything is shiny and nice in other startups. And these are examples of like everybody fucks up and everybody has Game of Thrones in their company. And so that's my hot take.
Yeah, so that's on Ilya and so on. And then Scarlett Johansson, okay, this is mostly a funny story, right? Just for those who missed this little storm in a teacup. Basically, Scarlett Johansson issued a statement yesterday against OpenAI because she felt and had some evidence she believed that the voice that was used in the demo, I think called Sky, was designed to sound like her voice as the AGI in the movie Her.
Yeah.
And then Sam Altman just tweeted out a tweet with a single word her in it, which obviously stoked the flames. So I think, that is just kind of gossip. The only interesting thing, like drawing these two bits of news together is, I guess, about AI ethics and being responsible. And I don't want to kind of belabor the point, but, there's a couple of things. So first of all, Ilya and all the other people who left from the alignment or super alignment team, they were the AI safety people. So yes, it's Game of Thrones, but also I think it's a bit like Sam and the OpenAI team. They just kind of want to build an awesome product. And I think the safety stuff, I'm not saying they're neglecting it, but I don't think they want it to be the constraint on their product development. And then Her is, for Sam to want his interface to be like Her is interesting because Her was really a cautionary tale. And there's this, old tweet that resurfaced, in context, which I love. I'll just read it out. I think if you're watching on video, hopefully we can flash it on the screen. And the tweet goes, "Sci-fi author. In my book, I invented the Torment Nexus as a cautionary tale. Tech company. At long last, we have created the Torment Nexus from the classic sci-fi novel, Don't Create the Torment Nexus." Which is funny. God. And I think in a sense, like if Her is a cautionary tale and Sam Altman is treating it as like a roadmap, it does sort of speak to, okay, how are we going to make sure that we don't just sort of all end up staying at home by ourselves with our AI girlfriends and boyfriends and living in some weird combination of Her and Wall-E.
And also, like, what is IP and what is like original creation and what is your voice, and do people have access to our voice? Because I'm sure that in a couple of years, even this conversation could be used to train AI to sound exactly like you and exactly like me. Even probably the technology exists today. Do they have right on our voice now, or do we have right on our voice? So I think there's a lot of like complexity that we're going to face with IP and creativity rights.
And, I think what's interesting is I think this kind of illustrates or showcases a bit the dog in Sam Altman. He's a very presentable, well-spoken, nice person. That's how he presents, right? But I think there's definitely like a lot of Elon or Travis Kalanick in how he operates. He is a ruthless operator, a little bit of an iconoclast, a little bit of a troll. And, he's not going to let other people get in the way of his vision, which I think is fine. I think the world needs people like that, but it also needs counterbalances. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing to sort of grapple with over the next few years. He's not as he appears.
I agree.
All right, Amir, that was fun. Just two of us, but we managed to put a pretty good discussion together. So thanks so much, as always, for coming on the show, and see you again soon.
Thank you. It was a good conversation.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. To sell to the enterprise, proving security is essential. Vanta allows you to breeze your way through to SOC 2, ISO 27001, or Essential 8 compliance and unlock major growth for your company. Go to vanta.com/TSP today. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to claim your $1,000 off.